Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome. I welcome you all to this lecture in the course Sandhi in Paninian grammar. We are studying Ach Sandhi for some time now, which is vowel Sandhi. We stated that there are two types of classes of Ach Sandhi. First one being Ekasthanika Ekadesha and the second one being Dvisthanika Ekadesha. Ekasthanika Ekadesha stands for one sthani and one adesha, one substituent and one substitute, one substitute coming in place of one substituent. And Dvisthanika Ekadesha stands for two substituents and one substitute. One substitute replacing two substituents. This we shall study later. Right now we are focusing on Ekasthanika Ekadesha. And we stated that there are two instances of this Ekasthanika Ekadesha. The first one is Yan Sandhi and the second one is Ayavayav Sandhi. We have already studied Yan Sandhi in detail and we have been studying the second instance of Ekasthanika Ekadesha, namely Ayavayav Sandhi. We continue studying this Ayavayav Sandhi even in this particular lecture. The Ekasthanika Ekadesha, as we saw earlier, can be diagrammatically represented in this particular fashion as shown on the slide. It is important to remember that this Ekasthanika Ekadesha is stated in the Ashtadhyayi in the section from 6172 onwards up to 6183, and its diagrammatic representation is of this kind, where you have A followed immediately by B in close proximity. That means A and B are both in the Samhita mode, and then A is substituted by C. A is the sthani, C is the adesha. Ekasthani, Eka adesha. B is the nimitta. So in the right hand side environment of B, A is substituted by C. So A plus B is the input and C plus B is the output. Now we are studying Ayavayav Sandhi. First we studied the sutra which states Ayavayav Sandhi, which is Echoyavayavaha. Then we also studied the Uddeshya Vidheya Bhava and the sutra prescribing this Uddeshya Vidheya Bhava in the Ashtadhyayi in the system of Paninian grammar, namely Anudit Savarnasya Chapratyayaha. Then after the application of this particular sutra to Echoyavayavaha, we noted down the template examples of this particular sutra and this particular type of sandhi. Then we took concrete specific examples to explain Ayavayav Sandhi, where I, Av, I and Av are the substitutes in place of A, O, I and Au respectively. Then we studied some additional rules where the right hand side environment is not vowels, is the consonant year. We studied two such sutras, Vantoyi Pratyaye and Dhatos Tannimittasyaiva, 6179 and 6180. These are the additional rules. And now we shall study two more additional rules. But before going there, let us quickly study the main sutra stating the ayavayav sandhi, which is echo yavayavaha. Echo yavayavaha has got two words in it, echaha and ayavayavaha. This is 6178. Echaha is 61 of H, meaning in place of H. Ayavayavaha is 1/3 of ayavayav. H is a pratyahara formed by capturing the sounds that appear in sutras 4 and 5 in the pratyahara sutras. So there are 4 sounds which are part of H, namely A, O, I and O. And ayavayav has got 4 substitutes, Aya, Av, Ay and Av. Achi is continued, and so echo yavayavaha means immediately before ach, that is a vowel, H is substituted by Aya, Av, I and Av respectively. On this background, let us study the additional sutra Kshaya Jayau Shakyarthe. But before going there, we must remember one thing. As far as echo yavayavaha is concerned, the right hand side environment is ach. Then we saw 2 sutras, Vantoye Pratyaye and Dhatos Tannimittasyaiva, in which the right hand side environment is not ach. The right hand side environment is a pratyaya that begins with consonant y. And this same right hand side environment in the form of a pratyaya that begins with y continues even in 6181 Kshaya Jayau Shakyarthe, where we see that the domain of application of this sutra gets further contracted, both in terms of the meaning that is conveyed and also the word forms that are generated. We noted that in 6180 Dhatos Tannimittasyaiva, the scope of the sutra was contracted to the dhatu. Now in this sutra, that is further contracted and restricted only to 2 dhatus, Kshi and Ji. So in this sutra there are 2 words, Kshaya Jayau, which is 1/2 of Kshaya Jaya, and Shakyarthe, which is 7/1, which means in the sense of possible to do, Shakya. So the meaning of this sutra, overall meaning is this. Kshaya and Jaya are the forms having the Aya substitution in place of A when conditioned by the suffix beginning with y immediately following, in the sense of possible to slay or destroy and possible to win. Once again, Kshaya and Jaya are the forms having the I substitution in place of A when conditioned by the suffix beginning with y immediately following, in the sense of possible to slay or destroy and also possible to win. Here are the examples. Here we have Kshi plus y to begin with, and Kshi is substituted by Kshe because of this y. So this y is added by 3197 and then by 7384, because of this y Kshi becomes Kshe. So E is substituted by A. So this A is conditioned by this suffix y. In such a case, this A gets substituted by Aya. And so we have Kshaya plus y, Kshaya, something that can be slain or that can be destroyed, as opposed to Kshaya, which means something that should be destroyed and not something that can be destroyed. So the derivation process ordinarily would stop at this stage, kshe plus ya. There is no sutra prescribing this a to be substituted by aya. Vanto yi pratyaye states that o and au only are substituted by av and av when immediately followed by a suffix that begins with ya. There isn't any sutra which states aya and aya as the substitutes in place of a and I. Now in this case only a vowel is substituted by aya in both these cases. So we notice the contraction of the overall scope of application of this particular sutra. Such sutras are called Nipatana sutras because they are too specific. So these two examples, they denote something special, some specific meaning, so that some specific meaning acts as the domain of operation of this rule, and also the word form which is pertaining to two roots kshi and ji. So this is a Nipatana sutra in terms of meaning and also in terms of the form. So kshaya is a form that is generated in the sense of shakya, something that can be destroyed, and kshaya is another form that can be generated, but that will mean something that should be destroyed and not something that can be destroyed. There is a shade of difference of meaning in these two words and their meanings. Similarly, we have G plus ya, and G is substituted by J. In fact, E is substituted by A because of this ya suffix. This is once again stated by 3197, and because of this ya, this E becomes A by 7384. And now there isn't any sutra which states aya as the substitute in place of this A, and so this sutra comes into play and substitutes A by aya, and so we have jaya plus ya, and so we get the form jaya, meaning something that can be conquered, as opposed to jaya. If we stop here, because there isn't any other rule that applies at this particular stage, so the finally derived output would be jaya, but then that would mean something that should be conquered, and jaya would not mean something that can be conquered. There is difference of meaning, the shade of these meanings is different. Something that should be conquered and something that can be conquered. Ksheyam papam jayam manaha, that is the line stated in Vyakarana Siddhanta Kaumudi. Ksheyam papam, papa is something that should be destroyed. It is always not possible to destroy it, but that should be destroyed. And jayam manaha, mind, is something that should be conquered. However, it is not possible to conquer it, but it should be conquered. So we have the word jaya. Jaya means something that can be conquered. So if you have a sentence in which the word jaya is used, like ajaya, ajaya shakti for example, here it means shakti or the strength which cannot be conquered. Ajaya shakti, something that can be conquered, something that cannot be conquered. Ajaya. The explanation is this: the verbal roots kshi to destroy or to slay and ji to conquer appear immediately before a suffix that begins with consonant ya. The a substitute in the verbal roots kshi to destroy or to slay and ji to conquer is caused by this particular suffix that begins with the consonant ya. In such a case now, the substitute that ends in ya in place of a which in this case is aya, takes place in a limited domain of meaning. Kshaya jayau shakyarthe, in the sense of shakya. So once again we state that kshaya jayau shakyarthe applies in a very limited domain of meaning as well as the words. Now we go to the next sutra, Krayas Tadarthe, 6182. This is like the previous sutra, 6181, another Nipatana sutra. The meaning of Krayas Tadarthe is the following. Krayas is 1/1 of Kraya, Tadarthe is 7/1 of Tadartha. Tadartha means in the sense of that, in the sense of that verbal root. So the meaning of the sutra is, the word kraya is derived by adding the suffix ya to the verbal root kri, to buy, in the sense of something that is to be bought. For something worth buying, the word derived from the verbal root kri by adding the suffix ya would be kreya. So kreya and kraya, even though are derived by adding the suffix ya to the verbal root kri, do mean different things. Kraya means something that is to be bought, and kreya means something worth buying. The shade of difference of meaning is visible. Here is an explanation. So here we have the derivation process where we take the verbal root kri and add the suffix ya to it by 3197. Then by 7384 this kri is substituted by kre, where a is the substitute in place of e, and so we have kre plus ya. Now the derivation process actually stops here, because there isn't any rule which states the substitution aya in place of a at this stage. However, 6182 comes into play and says that substitute this a because this is part of the verbal root kri and a particular meaning is also intended. So this kre is to be substituted by kraya, a is to be substituted by aya, and so we get the form kraya plus ya, kraya, something that is bought. And kraya, if we stop just here, kre plus ya will mean something that should be bought, or that is worth buying. The explanation is this: the verbal root kri appears immediately before a suffix that begins with consonant ya. The a in kre, the a which is the substitute in the verbal root, is caused by this suffix that begins with consonant ya. In such a case, the substitute that ends in ya in place of a, which is aya, takes place. So this happens in a limited domain of meaning as well as very narrow, very limited domain of the word. The meaning is tadartha and the domain of the word is just the verbal root kri and nothing else. After having studied these two Nipatana sutras, which act as exceptions to Echoyavayavaha in terms of the environment, which is right hand side environment, and of course the meaning, now we should study towards the end of our limited study of Ayavayav Sandhi, the interrelation of sutras. Interrelation of sutras, namely Engah Padantadati, Lopashakalyasya and Halantyam with Echoyavayavaha. Let us take each sutra one by one. First, let us study the interrelation of Engah Padantadati 61109 with Echoyavayavaha. The sutra Engah Padantadati we shall study when we study the second type of Achsandhi, namely Dvisthanika Ekadesha, in detail later on. This is the Purvarupa Sandhi stating sutra Engah Padantad Ati. What it means is, in brief, in place of both ing and appears one substitute, the earlier stated one, that is purva rupa, when this ing appears at the end of a pada, followed immediately by a short I repeat, in place of both ing and appears one substitute, the earlier stated one, purva rupa, when ing appears at the end of a pada, followed immediately by a short Remember, short So we have, this is the pada, earlier pada, at the end of which appears ing. Before that there are some sounds, and this pada is followed by the other pada, at the beginning of which is short remember, not any other short followed by some other sounds. Then in this case, the Sutra 61109 would apply, and the output generated would be ing. That's all, and this is not there. So we have only ing. So ing is one substitute in place of ing plus And the concrete examples are of this kind. We have hare as another pada and ava as another pada. Both of them coming close, in close proximity in the Samhita mode. And so now we have a situation where a, which is part of ing, is coming at the end of one pada. So this is padanta followed by and so now 61109 applies, and in place of this a and we have just one a over here. So the output generated primarily is her a v. To show the boundaries, we can say that this is hare plus v, the output generated, that is hare v. Similarly, Vishnu plus ava, where o appears at the end of a pada. Vishnu is another pada, ava is another pada. They come into close proximity in the Samhita mode. So o, which is padanta, is immediately followed by and so 61109 applies, and here we have Vishnu ending in consonant, o coming in place of o and followed by v. Now if we show the pada boundary, we can show that Vishnu as the previous pada and v as the next pada. Joining together we get Vishnu v. O Vishnu protect, O Hari protect. That is the meaning of these words. Now in this case, if we observe closely, we have a, in this case we have a followed by in this case we have o followed by The scope of application of echo yavayavaha as well. Now this particular rule 61109 requires some special conditions. Echo yavayavaha requires h immediately followed by ach, that's all. But this sutra 61109 requires not h but ing, which is part of h. This also requires that this ing appears at the end of a pada. And this also requires that the following vowel is short and not any kind of ach. We noted that echo yavayavaha requires h. There is no condition that it should be at the end of a pada. It can be at the end of a pada or it can be within a pada, and any ach is the right hand side environment for echo yavayavaha. But for 61109, some specifics, some special conditions are required. All this makes the domain of application of this particular rule 61109 much shorter than 6179, and in this shorter domain 6179 does not apply. So this is how Engah Padantadati is interrelated with echo yavayavaha. Now let us look at the second sutra, Shlopashakalya, and its interrelation with echo yavayavaha. Lopashakalya means ya and va appearing at the end of a pada and preceded by short or long any and immediately followed by a sound mentioned in the pratyahara ash. So this ya and va is deleted according to Shakalya. Shakalya is the name of a grammarian. According to Shakalya, this ya and va appearing at the end of a pada and preceded by whether it is short or long, and immediately followed by a sound mentioned in the pratyahara ash, this ya and va is deleted according to Shakalya. And the tradition says that because the sutra mentions the word Shakalya, and according to Shakalya these ya and va are to be deleted in the specific environment. So according to Panini, these ya and va are not to be deleted. Overall, this results in the optional deletion of ya and va in these environments. Just to note that the word ash stands for all vowels plus semi-vowels plus consonants 5, 4 and 3 plus consonant h. So all these, they are covered in the first 10 sutras in the Pratyahara Sutras. To put it in the form of an equation and show some examples, we can say that if aya, ava and ava appears at the end of a pada, so they are preceded by some sounds. Okay, so this ya comes at the end of a pada preceded by ya comes at the end of a pada and preceded by a, and obviously there are previous sounds, and all these are followed by another pada at the beginning of which comes ash. Then the output generated is twofold. Once you have ya deleted and va deleted, so and a plus ash, or as it is aya, ava plus ash. This would be the resultant form, optional deletion. For example, we have already seen this example, vartate. So a comes at the end of this pada followed by asha, where a comes at the beginning of this pada. So 6178 applies and this a is substituted by aya, so we have vartataya plus asha, and now by the application of 8319 this year will be optionally dropped. So we have vartata asha, and we have studied several examples of this kind when we looked at specific examples of echo yavayavaha. Here are some of them. Labhate plus ishtam. Here we have a followed by e, and 6178 applies. A is at the end of a pada, e is at the beginning of a pada, e is ash, and so we have e is also ach, and so we have echo yavayavaha applying, and the output generated is labhataya ishtam. Now in this case, ya comes at the end of a pada preceded by short followed by e, that is ash, and so this ya according to Shakalya gets optionally deleted, that is labhata ishtam, and according to Panini it is not deleted. So we have labhataya ishtam. Both these forms are generated. Similarly, vartate ishvaraha. Here we have a coming at the end of a pada followed by long e at the beginning of the second pada, and so echo yavayavaha applies. We get vartataya plus ishvaraha as the output, and in this case ya coming at the end of a pada preceded by short followed by e, that is ash. So 8319 applies and this ya gets optionally deleted. So we get two forms, vartataya ishvaraha or vartata ishvaraha. Similarly, we have vartai followed by asha, where we have I coming at the end of the pada followed by a. So echo yavayavaha applies and we had vartaya plus asha, And so this ya coming at the end of a pada preceded by a, long a in this case, followed by a, that is ash. So this ya gets deleted by the view of Shakalya, and according to the view of Panini it is not deleted. So we have these two forms, Vartaya Asha and Varta Asha. What is important to remember over here is that 8319 requires the output of 6178 as input. The output of 6178, namely Echo Yava Yavaha, is an input to 8319. Then this 8319 modifies that input and generates an optional output. Now this optional output is not visible to any rule in 6.1, for example, and this is stated by Purvatra Siddham 821. So what do? So we do not apply any other rule to this output of 8319, even though the scope of application of another rule is visible to us. That scope of application is not visible to the other rule within the system as per the systemic rule 821. So in Varta and Asha, where you have A followed by A, which is the scope of application of 61101 Akassavarne Dirghaha, we still do not apply 61101 and do not generate Vartasha. This is not generated. This is not desirable. This is very important as far as the interrelation between 8319 and 6178 is concerned. And now the interrelation between 6178 and 132. 132 is Halantyam. What it states is that any consonant at the end of an element in the original enunciation is termed a marker or it, and then it is deleted by 139. Tasya lopaha. I repeat, 132 Halantyam says that any consonant at the end of an element in the original enunciation is termed a marker or it and is deleted by 139. Now this rule and the term it is not applied to ya and va, which appear at the end of the substitutes stated by 6178. Echo Yava Yavaha, Aya, Av, Aya and Av. The main reason is that there is no purpose for them being marked as it. No operation is stated making ya and va markers as triggers. So there is no point in giving them the it saudhnya and therefore deleting them. This is an explanation offered by the later Paninian grammatical tradition. This is the interrelation between Halantyam and Echo Yava Yavaha. To summarize what we have studied so far in terms of Ayavayav Sandhi is the following. We studied the second instance, namely Ayavayav Sandhi, of the first classification, namely Ekasthanika Ekadesha, of the vowel Sandhi in detail. We studied the sutras stating this particular Ayavayav Sandhi. We studied the meaning of these sutras, their implications, their examples and also the exceptions. We also studied the interrelation of sutras in this particular regard. Notable amongst them is Lopashakalya, which is stated in the Asiddha Kanda, which modifies the output of Echo Yavayavaha, and the output of Lopashakalya is not visible to the earlier sutras, so we don't apply other Sandhi rules on the output of Lopashakalya. Now hereafter we study the second classification of vowel Sandhi, namely Dvisthanika Ekadesha, 2 substituents and 1 substitute. This we shall study from the next lecture onwards. Thank you very much.